I looked my husband straight in the eyes and warned him. One more word from your mother about my salary, and there will be no more polite conversations. I will explain to her myself where her place is and why my money is not her property. Do you understand? My name is Madeline. I am 34 years old, and I am the founder and chief executive officer of an educational technology company based in Chicago. I built my platform from the ground up to help autistic children learn and communicate better. It took years of sleepless nights eating cheap noodles in a tiny apartment and working 80-hour weeks to turn my vision into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. I sacrificed my youth, my sleep, and my peace of mind to build something meaningful. I thought my husband Caleb understood my sacrifices. I thought we were a team building a future together. But last Friday, on our 5th wedding anniversary, I learned that my success was nothing more than a personal bank account for his greedy family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your hard-earned success from entitled relatives who thought they deserved a piece of your life. The evening was supposed to be an intimate celebration. I had made reservations months in advance at one of the most exclusive Michelin-starred restaurants in downtown Chicago. The dining room was a masterpiece of modern design, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the beautiful city skyline, dimly lit tables, and an atmosphere of quiet luxury. I wore a custom silk dress I had bought specifically for this milestone. Caleb wore his best suit. For a brief moment, as the host led us to our secluded corner table, I genuinely believed we were going to have a romantic night celebrating our 5 years of marriage. We had barely looked at the tasting menu when a loud and overly familiar voice shattered the elegance of the dining room. There they are. I told you we would find them. I froze. I looked up to see my mother-in-law Beatrice striding across the plush carpet, with my sister-in-law Vanessa trailing right behind her. Beatrice was dressed in a flashy sequined blazer that was entirely inappropriate for the sophisticated venue, while Vanessa was busy recording a video on her phone for her followers. Vanessa called herself a lifestyle influencer, but her entire brand was an illusion funded by her brother. More accurately, it was funded by me. "What are you two doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. Caleb suddenly looked very interested in his cloth napkin, refusing to meet my gaze. Beatrice waved her hand dismissively as she pulled out a chair uninvited and sat right next to Caleb. "Oh, do not be so stiff, Madeline. Caleb mentioned you two were eating here tonight, and Vanessa and I simply had to join. It is a family milestone after all. 5 years of marriage is a big deal, and we should celebrate together as a family." Before I could point out that an anniversary dinner is meant strictly for the married couple, Beatrice was already snapping her fingers at the sommelier to get his attention. The sommelier approached with practiced grace, offering the extensive wine list to Caleb, but Beatrice snatched the heavy leather-bound book right out of his hands. She did not even glance at the affordable options. She flipped straight to the reserve section, her eyes scanning the highest numbers on the page with absolute greed. "We will take the vintage Bordeaux," Beatrice announced, tapping her manicured fingernail against a bottle listed at $2,000. "And bring 2 more glasses. We have a lot to celebrate tonight." The sommelier hesitated, looking directly at me, since I was the one who had booked the table under my name. I was about to politely decline the absurd order when Beatrice leaned back in her chair and smiled a smile that was entirely devoid of warmth or affection. "Do not worry about the price," Beatrice told the sommelier loudly enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "My daughter-in-law will be paying the bill tonight. She just closed a massive funding round for her little software company. Millions of dollars, apparently. A $2,000 bottle of wine is just pocket change for her now. Bring us the best you have." I felt a cold flash of anger radiate through my chest. My platform had indeed just secured a massive Series B funding round, but that money was strictly for expanding our educational programs for autistic children and hiring specialized therapists. It was not a personal slush fund for my mother-in-law to buy luxury wine to show off to strangers. I looked at Caleb, expecting him to intervene to protect the boundaries of our anniversary dinner and defend his wife. He simply offered a weak smile, rubbed the back of his neck, and said that we should just let them celebrate with us to keep the peace. I took a deep breath, controlling my expression perfectly. I did not cause a public scene. I allowed the sommelier to pour the wine, knowing exactly what game Beatrice was playing. She wanted to test my limits to see how much of my wealth she could publicly claim as her own territory without me fighting back. The dinner progressed exactly as one might expect when uninvited guests hijack a romantic evening. Beatrice dominated the entire conversation, talking loudly about the expensive country club memberships she wanted to renew and the luxury overseas vacations her friends were taking. Vanessa spent the entire time taking photos of the expensive food, holding her left hand up to the light to make sure her new engagement ring caught the flash of the camera. She made sure everyone in the restaurant noticed her. "Speaking of celebrations," Beatrice announced as the waiter cleared our main courses and prepared the table for dessert. "We have some wonderful news to share tonight. Vanessa and her fiancé are finally buying their first home." Vanessa thrust her hand forward, wiggling her fingers to emphasize the heavy diamond ring. "Yes, we found the most gorgeous property in the northern suburbs. It has 5 massive bedrooms, a huge swimming pool, and a dedicated studio space with perfect natural light for my content creation. It is listed at $1.2 million. That is quite a purchase for someone who does not have a steady income." I noted casually, taking a slow sip of my sparkling water. Vanessa scowled, her fake influencer smile dropping instantly. "Content creation is a real job, Madeline. Just because I do not sit in a boring corporate office all day does not mean I do not work hard. Building a brand takes immense effort and dedication." Beatrice patted Vanessa on the arm protectively and turned her sharp gaze entirely on me. "The mortgage is not an issue at all. We are here tonight because we need to finalize the logistics of the down payment." I set my glass down on the table. "Logistics? What logistics?" Beatrice smiled, leaning forward like a predator cornering its prey. "Caleb has already promised that he will provide the $300,000 down payment for his little sister to secure the house. He is a good brother, a true provider for his family. But since the money is sitting in your joint investment account, the bank requires both signatures to authorize a withdrawal of that size. I need you to sign the power of attorney paperwork tomorrow morning so Caleb can wire the funds to the escrow account by noon. The sellers are waiting and we cannot delay this." The sheer audacity of her demand hung in the heavy air of the restaurant. $300,000. They were sitting at my anniversary dinner drinking a $2,000 bottle of wine that they expected me to pay for, and casually demanding $350,000 of my hard-earned savings to buy a mansion for a grown woman who refused to work a real job. I looked at Caleb. He was sweating profusely, his face pale under the restaurant lighting. He had promised them my money without ever consulting me. He had used my 80-hour work weeks, my unbelievable stress, my relentless drive to build an educational company as his own personal charity fund to buy his mother and sister affection and loyalty. "Caleb," I said, my voice dangerously quiet and utterly flat, "is this true?" Caleb swallowed hard, adjusting his tight collar. "Madeline, come on. She is my sister. We have plenty of money in that investment account. We do not even need all of it right now. It is just sitting there doing nothing. Family helps family. We can easily afford to help her get settled into a nice neighborhood." I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I simply signaled the waiter and handed him my personal corporate credit card. I instructed him to charge exactly half of the food we consumed, and absolutely nothing for the wine or the desserts they ordered. Then I stood up, picking up my purse. "Caleb, we are going outside to talk." "Right now," I said, leaving no room for argument. Beatrice scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Oh, do not be so dramatic, Madeline. Sit down and finish your dessert. You make more than enough money to handle this small favor. It is your duty to contribute to this family now that you are wealthy." I ignored her entirely, keeping my eyes locked intensely on Caleb. He saw the absolute zero tolerance in my expression and reluctantly stood up, following me out of the dining room and into the quiet, dimly lit corridor near the coat check. As soon as the heavy wooden doors closed behind us, cutting off the noise of the busy restaurant, Caleb started his defensive rambling. "Madeline, you are overreacting. You are making me look bad in front of my mother and sister." We are married. That investment account is marital property. I have every legal right to use those funds to help my family. You are acting like a selfish dictator who wants to hoard every penny. That was when I stepped closer to him, invading his personal space, forcing him to look me directly in the eye. I delivered the warning that should have ended his delusion right there on the spot. I looked my husband straight in the eyes and warned him. One more word from your mother about my salary, and there will be no more polite conversations. I will explain to her myself where her place is and why my money is not her property. Do you understand? Caleb crossed his arms, trying to look intimidating but failing completely. You are my wife. What is yours is mine. I already promised them the money, Madeline. I am not going back to that table and looking like a fool because my wife refuses to share her wealth. You will sign that paper tomorrow morning so we can get this over with. I did not argue further. I did not need to. I turned my back on him, walked out the front doors of the restaurant, and signaled for a taxi, leaving him to figure out how to pay for a $2,000 bottle of wine on his very average mid-level logistics manager salary. The ride back to our house was totally silent. I watched the city lights blur past the window, my mind operating with complete clinical precision. Caleb and I had opened that joint investment account 3 years ago when we bought our house together. Over time, I had deposited the vast majority of the funds into it, viewing it as our safety net for the future. Caleb contributed a tiny fraction of what I did, but his name was technically on the account. Legally, he had access, but our bank had strict security protocols for massive wire transfers, requiring dual authorization and verbal confirmation for anything over $50,000. Or so I thought. Caleb did not come home that night. I assumed he went to stay at his mother's house, likely complaining about my terrible behavior and planning how to force my hand the next day. I slept surprisingly well. I was not heartbroken. I was activated. When people show you they view you as a financial resource rather than a human being, the only logical response is to cut off their supply permanently. Early the next morning, before the sun had even fully risen, I sat at my home office desk. I brewed a strong cup of black coffee, opened my laptop, and prepared to transfer every single dollar from that joint investment account into a private secure account under my sole name. If Caleb thought he could use my money to fund Vanessa and her fake influencer lifestyle, he was severely mistaken. I navigated to the banking portal. I typed in my credentials securely, bypassing the two-factor authentication prompt on my phone. The banking dashboard loaded slowly, the little blue circle spinning on the screen. I took a sip of my hot coffee, planning exactly how I would structure the transfer to ensure Caleb had zero access by the time he woke up. The screen refreshed, loading the complete account summary. I stared at the monitor. I blinked, putting my coffee mug down so hard the dark liquid spilled over the rim and stained the mahogany desk. I leaned closer to the bright screen, convinced there was a massive glitch in the banking system. The joint investment account was listed right at the top of the dashboard. Available balance $0. A cold, terrifying chill washed over my entire body. I rapidly clicked on the transaction history, my fingers flying across the trackpad. The history loaded, revealing a single massive transaction executed exactly 2 days prior. It was an outbound electronic wire transfer for exactly $300,000. The destination account was listed under a corporate entity name I did not recognize, registered in Delaware. The transfer had been fully authorized, processed, and cleared. But that was completely impossible. The bank required dual authorization for any wire transfer of that magnitude. Caleb could not have moved that money without my signature, without my direct verbal confirmation to the bank manager. I had not signed anything. I had not approved anything at all. My mind raced, connecting the dots with terrifying speed. Caleb had not been asking for my permission at the restaurant. Beatrice had not been demanding my signature for a future transfer. They had been trying to cover their tracks for a financial crime they had already committed. Caleb must have forged my signature on the wire authorization forms and somehow bypassed the verbal confirmation protocol with the bank. He had stolen $300,000 of my money 2 days before our anniversary dinner and had the absolute audacity to sit across from me eating expensive food while pretending the money was still there waiting for my approval. I picked up my phone and dialed Caleb's number. My heart was pounding, a steady, relentless drumbeat in my ears. The phone rang 3 times before going straight to voicemail. "Hi, this is Caleb. I cannot take your call right now. Leave a message." I hung up. I did not leave a message. I did not scream or throw my phone against the wall. Instead, a profound, terrifying calmness settled over my entire being. Caleb had thought he could outsmart me. He thought he could steal the money I bled to earn and hide behind the legal shield of our marriage. He thought I would cry and eventually accept it because family is family. He had no idea what kind of brutal war he had just started. I picked up my phone again and dialed the one person who could help me burn his entire world to the ground. My personal financial attorney and former federal investigator, Harrison. The polite, accommodating wife was dead. The chief executive officer was about to take total charge and destroy everyone who tried to rob her. I dialed Harrison's number immediately. Harrison was not just my personal financial attorney. He was a former federal investigator who specialized in tracking white-collar crime before he transitioned to private practice. He was brilliant, ruthless, and entirely devoted to protecting my assets. The phone rang exactly twice before his deep voice answered. "Harrison, I need you at the main branch of the central bank downtown in 20 minutes," I said, keeping my voice absolutely devoid of emotion. $300,000 was wired out of my joint investment account 2 days ago without my authorization. I need your eyes on the paperwork right now. Harrison did not ask me to calm down or ask if there was a misunderstanding. He simply said he would meet me at the front doors and hung up. I grabbed my coat and drove straight to the financial district. The morning traffic was heavy, but I navigated the streets with a singular, icy focus. When I arrived at the massive glass and steel building of the bank, Harrison was already standing by the entrance wearing his sharp, tailored suit and holding his leather briefcase. We walked inside together, bypassing the regular teller lines and heading directly to the office of the branch manager. The branch manager, a man named Gregory who had personally helped me set up my corporate accounts, looked surprised to see us barge into his office without an appointment. His welcoming smile faded the moment he saw Harrison's expression. "Gregory, I need the complete file on the outgoing wire transfer of $300,000 executed from my joint investment account on Wednesday." I demanded, sitting down in the leather chair opposite his desk. "And I need the physical authorization forms pulled immediately." Gregory nervously adjusted his tie, tapping his keyboard. "Madeline, that transaction was fully authorized. Your husband Caleb submitted the paperwork in person. He stated it was an urgent real estate deposit for a family property. Since it was a joint account, he had the right to initiate the transfer. He does not have the right to bypass dual authorization for amounts over $50,000. Harrison interjected, his tone sharp and authoritative. "Produce the signature mandate, Gregory, right now." Gregory hurried to the filing cabinet and pulled a thick manila folder, placing it on the desk. He slid a piece of paper toward me. "This is the dual authorization form. It has both of your signatures. Caleb brought it in, already signed by you, and we verified your signature against our system records. He also provided a sworn affidavit that you were in a closed-door board meeting and could not be reached by phone for the verbal confirmation. Given his status as your legal husband and joint account holder, the compliance team approved the override." I picked up the document and stared at the ink. The signature at the bottom of the page looked incredibly similar to mine. The slant of the letters, the pressure of the pen, it was a highly practiced imitation. But it was not mine. The loop on the capital M was slightly too wide, and the sharp angle at the end of my last name was missing. Caleb had spent hours studying my handwriting to perfect this. He had forged my signature, committed a federal offense, and lied directly to the bank manager to bypass the security protocols. "This is a forgery," I stated flatly, sliding the paper over to Harrison. "I was not in a board meeting on Wednesday. I was giving a keynote speech at an educational conference, and I have 300 witnesses to prove it." Gregory turned completely pale. He realized instantly that his branch had just processed a fraudulent wire transfer and opened the bank up to massive federal liability. Harrison examined the document, pulling a pen from his pocket to point at the routing numbers. Gregory pulled up the receiving account details. Caleb claimed this was a real estate deposit for a house. Let us see exactly where this money went. Gregory frantically typed on his computer, his hands visibly shaking. The receiving account is not an escrow account for a real estate agency. It is a corporate checking account. The registered entity is a limited liability company based in Delaware. Harrison let out a short, humorless laugh. A Delaware shell company. That is textbook asset dissipation. I sat back in my chair, feeling the true weight of my husband's betrayal settle over me. That $300,000 was not just money. It was my literal blood, sweat, and tears. I closed my eyes for a second, remembering exactly what it took to earn that specific amount. When I first launched my educational technology platform 4 years ago, I had absolutely nothing. I worked 80 hours every single week without a single day off. I skipped meals. I slept on a thin mattress on the floor of my tiny office because I could not afford to pay rent for a separate apartment. I poured every ounce of my energy into building software that would help autistic children communicate. During those 4 grueling years of my life, Caleb complained constantly. He whined that I was not cooking dinner for him. He complained that I was working too much and neglecting my duties as a wife. While I was coding programs at 3 in the morning, Caleb was taking weekend golf trips with his mother Beatrice. He was buying expensive dinners for his sister Vanessa. He contributed absolutely nothing to that savings account. Every dollar in that investment portfolio was the result of my relentless grind. I deposited that money, thinking it was our safety net, our future. And now my husband had stolen it to fund a fake influencer lifestyle for a sister who despised me. But Harrison saw the bigger picture. He looked at me with his sharp investigator eyes. Madeline, he is not buying a house for Vanessa. Harrison said, his voice dropping to a serious whisper. You do not use a Delaware LLC to buy a residential home in the suburbs for your sister. Delaware offers total corporate anonymity. Caleb is hiding marital assets. He is moving your cash into a corporate structure where your name is nowhere to be found. He is preparing to file for divorce, and he is stealing your liquidity before he serves you with the papers. The realization hit me like a freight train. The dinner last night, the $2,000 bottle of wine, the ridiculous story about Vanessa buying a house. It was all a distraction. A theatrical performance orchestrated by Beatrice and Caleb to keep me confused while the money was safely routed into a hidden account. Caleb wanted to divorce me and take half of my successful company, but he wanted to secure a massive pile of cash first, just in case my corporate lawyers blocked him. I looked at Gregory, who was sweating through his expensive suit. I need certified copies of every single document in that file. I told the bank manager, my voice dropping to a freezing temperature. You are going to freeze any remaining joint accounts immediately. You will flag this transaction as fraudulent. Madeline, if we flag this as fraud, it automatically triggers a report to federal authorities. Gregory warned, his voice trembling. Your husband could face serious criminal charges for wire fraud and forging a signature on bank documents. I stood up from the chair, smoothing the front of my coat. I looked down at the forged signature one last time. I know exactly what it triggers, Gregory, I said. Provide the copies to my attorney. We have a lot of work to do today. I drove back to our house in the suburbs, feeling a terrifying sense of clarity. I parked my car in the driveway and walked inside the quiet living room. I sat on the expensive leather sofa we bought together, waiting for the man I married to walk through the front door. I did not have to wait long. The front door lock clicked. Caleb walked in wearing his tailored work suit and holding a massive bouquet of 24 premium red roses. He had that perfect practice smile on his face, the kind of smile he used when he wanted to charm his way out of a mistake. He thought this was just a marital spat over a dinner bill. He thought flowers would erase the humiliation I endured at the restaurant. He thought a grand romantic gesture would fix the fact that he was a thief. Madeline, honey. I am so sorry about last night. He walked toward me, holding out the vibrant red roses like a peace offering. My mother can be a lot to handle sometimes, and I should have defended you at the restaurant. I was just stressed with work. Let us make it up tonight. I made reservations at that Italian place you love, and we can just focus on us. I did not stand up. I did not reach out to take the flowers. I simply looked at the coffee table where I had placed the certified copies from the bank manager. I slid the manila folder forward until it rested at the edge of the glass table. I went to the central bank this morning, Caleb. I spoke with Gregory. I saw the wire transfer. The charming smile vanished from his face instantly. The heavy bouquet of roses dropped slightly to his side, hitting his leg. He stared at the manila folder and then swallowed hard. But he did not panic. He did not drop to his knees and beg for forgiveness. Narcissists never do. They pivot. They manipulate. They turn the tables to make you feel like you are the one losing your mind. Madeline, you went behind my back to the bank. Why are you acting so paranoid? He tossed the expensive roses onto the kitchen counter with a frustrated, heavy sigh. I told you we needed to help Vanessa buy her house. I took care of it so you would not have to stress over the financial logistics. I was actually doing you a favor by handling the paperwork myself. I kept my voice completely flat and devoid of any emotion. You forged my signature, Caleb. You committed federal wire fraud to funnel $300,000 into a Delaware shell company you control. That is not a marital favor. That is a felony. A felony. Are you listening to yourself, Madeline? You sound completely insane right now. He paced across the hardwood floor, running a hand through his hair, acting like he was the one being persecuted by an unreasonable spouse. My mother is drowning in severe debt. She has been hiding her financial ruin for years to keep up appearances in her social circle, and she is terrified of losing her standing. Vanessa is getting married soon, and she desperately needs a stable home to start her family. My family is in an absolute crisis, and you are sitting there throwing legal dictionary terms at me like some kind of soulless robot. He stopped pacing and glared at me, pointing a finger in my direction. You have an entire educational technology company worth millions of dollars. You literally have venture capitalists throwing money at you every single month, and you are going to stand there and begrudge my family a few $100,000. Are you really that greedy? I watched him perform. It was an absolute masterclass in psychological manipulation. He was trying to rewrite reality in real time. He wanted me to believe that protecting my hard-earned savings made me the villain of this story. He wanted me to feel immense guilt for being financially successful while his family leached off my bank accounts. I worked 80 hours a week for 4 years to earn that specific money, Caleb. I said, my gaze locking onto his defensive eyes. I sacrificed my health, my sleep, and my youth while you and your mother went on luxury vacations. My company valuation is not a free automated teller machine for your sister to play house and fund her fake internet lifestyle. It is our money, Madeline. We are married. I am your husband. He shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings of our living room. I supported you emotionally when you were building that stupid platform. I put up with your late nights and your constant exhaustion. You owe me, and you owe my family for welcoming you in. You came from absolutely nothing, and we gave you a respectable family name. He leaned over the coffee table, placing his hands flat on the glass, trying to intimidate me with his physical presence. You are so obsessed with your bank balance that you have forgotten how to be a decent human being. You have $1 million company, and you want to ruin our entire marriage over a tiny fraction of your net worth. You should be ashamed of yourself, Madeline. Real families support each other unconditionally without keeping score. But you only care about yourself. You are completely selfish and cold-blooded. I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear or raise my voice to match his manufactured outrage. I looked at the man who had slept beside me for 5 years and realized I felt absolutely nothing for him anymore. His gaslighting might have worked on me 3 years ago when I was exhausted, vulnerable, and desperate for his approval. Back then, I might have internalized his toxic words and apologized for being too focused on my career. But I was no longer that insecure woman. I was a chief executive officer who managed boardrooms full of ruthless investors. I recognized a bad investment when I saw one, and Caleb was the worst investment of my life. He thought calling me cold-blooded would break my spirit. He had no idea that my cold-blooded nature was exactly what was going to systematically dismantle his entire life. The silence stretched between us. The heavy air in our living room felt toxic. Caleb stared at my face, searching for any sign of weakness or hesitation. He found absolutely nothing. My posture remained perfectly straight. My hands were resting calmly on my lap. The tears he expected were completely absent. When he finally realized that his emotional manipulation had completely failed, his entire demeanor shifted. The desperate, panicked husband vanished. The mask of the loving provider melted away, revealing something incredibly ugly underneath. He stopped pacing. His shoulders dropped, and a cold, cynical smile crept across his face. He walked slowly over to the custom liquor cabinet I had purchased for him last year. He poured himself a glass of expensive bourbon, taking his time. The clinking of the ice cubes was the only sound in the room. He took a slow sip and turned back to face me. His eyes were entirely devoid of warmth. They were the eyes of a predator assessing its trapped prey. "You really think you hold all the cards here, Madeline?" Caleb said, his voice dropping to a smooth, calculating whisper. "You think because you are the chief executive officer of some tech startup, you can just dictate the rules of our marriage. You are smart when it comes to software, but you are completely ignorant when it comes to the law." He walked back to the glass coffee table and stood towering over me. He pointed his glass directly at my chest. "Let us talk about the law." He continued, his tone dripping with condescension. "We live in the state of Illinois. We do not have a prenuptial agreement. You started your little educational technology company exactly 2 years after we stood at the altar and signed our marriage certificate. Do you know what that means in the eyes of a family court judge?" I remained entirely silent, letting him dig his own grave with his words. I wanted to hear exactly how far he was willing to go. "It means your company is marital property." Caleb stated, his smile widening into a cruel grin. "Every single line of code you wrote, every single contract you signed, every single dollar of valuation your venture capitalists slapped on your business belongs to the marriage, which means half of it belongs to me." He took another sip of his bourbon, enjoying the power he thought he held over me. "So here is what is going to happen, Madeline. If you pick up that phone and call the police to report that wire transfer as fraud, I will file for divorce tomorrow morning. I will hire the most aggressive and ruthless divorce attorney in Chicago. I will demand exactly 50% of your company shares. I will demand permanent spousal support because I have grown accustomed to a certain lifestyle during our marriage." He leaned down, placing both hands on the table, bringing his face dangerously close to mine. "Think about your precious Series B funding round," he whispered maliciously. "You are right in the middle of closing a $50 million deal. What do you think those ruthless venture capitalists will do when they find out the founder and chief executive officer is locked in a brutal, public, and incredibly messy divorce? What will they do when my lawyers subpoena their financial records and drag them into family court? They will pull their funding immediately. They will run away from the terrible publicity. Your board of directors might even vote to remove you from your own company to protect their investment." The pure extortion hanging in the air was suffocating. He had planned this. He had not just stumbled into a bad decision to help his mother and his sister Vanessa. He had meticulously researched family law. He had calculated the exact moment my company was most vulnerable to a public scandal. The Delaware Shell Company was just the opening move in a massive financial chess game he thought he was winning. Caleb straightened up, finishing the last of his bourbon and setting the heavy glass down on the table with a loud thud. "You have a choice to make right now," Caleb commanded, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "You can keep acting like a paranoid lunatic, call the authorities, and watch me burn your entire multi-million-dollar empire to the ground. Or you can be a smart businesswoman. You can accept that $300,000 is the cost of doing business. Consider it a cheap buyout to keep your company intact and your investor meetings running smoothly." He pointed at the manila folder containing the bank documents. "Tear up those papers, Madeline. Call your bank manager, Gregory, and tell him you made a mistake and the wire transfer is fully approved. You let my sister keep that house. You smile at my mother next time you see her. You do all of that and your company survives. You get to keep playing the successful female founder. If you refuse, I will take half of everything you built and leave you with nothing but legal fees." He stood there waiting for my reaction. He expected me to crumble under the weight of his threat. He expected the fear of losing my company to force me into immediate submission. He thought my silence was the sound of a woman surrendering to his superior strategy. I looked at the man who was actively blackmailing me. I saw the absolute greed radiating from his pores. He was willing to destroy my life, my mission to help autistic children, and my entire future just to secure a payout for himself and his toxic mother, Beatrice. He really believed he had backed me into a corner where I had absolutely no escape. He believed the law was his ultimate weapon. What Caleb failed to realize was that I never enter a negotiation without knowing exactly how to destroy the person sitting across from me. I did not scream. I did not beg him to reconsider. I simply looked at him and absorbed every single threat he had just delivered. The polite wife he thought he could control was completely gone. He had just handed me the exact ammunition I needed to annihilate him. I stared at Caleb for exactly 10 seconds. I did not blink. I did not offer a single word of rebuttal to his grand extortion speech. Let him believe his threat of a brutal divorce had paralyzed me with fear. Let him think the prospect of venture capitalists pulling their $50 million funding was enough to make me surrender my hard-earned assets. He smiled that arrogant, complacent smile, turning his back to me to pour another splash of bourbon. He was already celebrating his victory. He genuinely believed his rudimentary Google search of Illinois family law had rendered me completely powerless. I picked up my car keys from the glass table. I turned around and walked straight out the front door, leaving him standing alone in our living room with his cheap liquor and his expensive delusions. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, severing the last remaining tie of my marriage. I drove straight back to downtown Chicago. The afternoon sky was turning a slate gray, mirroring my absolute resolve. I parked in the underground garage of an upscale commercial building and took the private elevator up to the 40th floor. Harrison was waiting for me in his corner office. The massive mahogany desk was already covered with the certified copies we had acquired from the bank manager earlier that morning. Harrison had a whiteboard set up, mapping out the corporate structure of the Delaware shell company Caleb had used to hide my money. I sat down in the leather chair across from him and relayed every single word Caleb had just spoken. I detailed his threat to file for divorce and claim half my educational technology company. I repeated his blackmail attempt regarding my Series B funding round and his demand that I allow his sister Vanessa to keep the stolen funds to buy her mansion. Harrison leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. His expression was a mix of professional disgust and predatory anticipation. Caleb is banking on the fact that family court is incredibly messy. Harrison explained, his voice steady and analytical. In a standard divorce without a prenuptial agreement, he would absolutely have a strong claim to 50% of the marital assets, including the valuation of your platform. He knows a prolonged legal battle would spook your investors. He is using your success as a weapon against you. I crossed my legs, looking directly at the whiteboard. But this is not a standard divorce, Harrison. This is not a dispute over who gets to keep the vacation home or the luxury cars. Exactly. Harrison smiled, a sharp, dangerous smile. Your husband made a fatal miscalculation. He thought he was playing chess in family court, but he accidentally walked onto a federal battlefield. Forging a signature to bypass bank security protocols and moving $300,000 across state lines into a hidden corporate entity is not marital asset dissipation, it is a federal crime. Before we could outline the specific logistics of our counterattack, my cell phone lit up on the desk. The caller identification displayed a name that made my blood run instantly cold. Beatrice. She could not help herself. Narcissists never can. They need to gloat. They need to ensure their victim feels entirely crushed beneath their heel. Caleb must have called her the moment I left the house, telling her that he had delivered the ultimate threat and that I had fled in absolute terror. I looked at Harrison. I tapped the screen and answered the call, putting it on speakerphone so the audio would echo clearly across the spacious office. I also hit the record button on my secondary device. Illinois is a two-party consent state for recording, but I was not gathering this audio for a courtroom. I was gathering it to document exactly how deep their delusion ran for my own leverage. "Hello, Beatrice," I said, my voice perfectly polite and even. "Madeline, darling." Beatrice practically purred through the speaker. Her voice was dripping with malicious satisfaction. "Caleb just told me you stormed out of the house. I hope you are taking some time to cool off and accept reality. We really do not want to see things get ugly for you and your little software project." I remained completely silent, giving her all the space she needed to hang herself with her own words. "You have always been so dramatic, Madeline." Beatrice continued, her tone shifting from fake sweetness to blatant condescension. "You need to understand how a real marriage works. Caleb is the man of the house. He is the head of the family, and he has the absolute right to decide how the family finances are distributed. He saw that his sister needed a home, and he stepped up to provide for her. That is what real men do." I heard a distinct clinking of crystal glasses in the background. She was likely sitting in her country club drinking expensive champagne funded by my stolen money. "You should be grateful we ever welcomed you into this family." Beatrice scoffed, her voice laced with pure venom. "You are nothing but a blue-collar girl who got lucky with a computer program. You grew up with absolutely nothing, and you still act like a greedy peasant hoarding every penny. You thought you could control my son because you make more money than him, but you forgot your place." I took a slow, quiet breath, letting her insults wash over me without leaving a single mark. My working-class background was the exact reason I possessed the grit to build a multi-million-dollar company. It was also the reason I was entirely capable of destroying them without a shred of hesitation. "Are you enjoying the wine, Beatrice?" I asked, my tone conversational. She laughed, a sharp, grating sound. "We are celebrating Vanessa and her beautiful new house. And you need to listen to me very carefully, Madeline. Do not even dream of trying to get a dime of that money back. Caleb has secured it perfectly, and my lawyers have assured me that you cannot touch it without destroying your own company in the process. Be a good wife. Apologize to your husband, and let this go. Or we will take half of everything you own." She did not wait for my response. She disconnected the call, leaving a hollow silence in the office. She wanted to have the last word. She wanted to feel powerful and untouchable. I stared at the black screen of my phone. I did not shed a single tear. I did not scream or express a shred of outrage over her vicious classist insults. The time for emotional reactions was completely over. I slowly looked up from my phone and met Harrison's eyes. He was already pulling a fresh legal pad toward him, his pen poised and ready. He knew exactly what that phone call meant. It was the final confirmation that this was a coordinated, malicious conspiracy to defraud me. They were all in on it. Caleb, Beatrice, and Vanessa. They believed they had outsmarted the system. I stood up from the chair and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the sprawling Chicago skyline. I had built my empire in this city. I had fought tooth and nail for my success, and I was not going to let a mediocre man and his parasitic family take a single piece of it. I turned back to Harrison. My voice was sharp, devoid of any warmth, and carrying the absolute authority of a chief executive officer ordering the destruction of a hostile entity. "Prepare the file for the Federal Bureau of Investigation," I commanded. Harrison nodded firmly, already drafting the header of the official report. "Compile the forged bank documents, the corporate registration of the Delaware Shell Company, and the timeline of the wire transfer." I continued, my tone dropping to a lethal calm. "Charge them with wire fraud, charge them with bank fraud, and loop in the Internal Revenue Service while you are at it. If they want to play dirty with my money, we are going to show them exactly what happens when you trigger a federal indictment. Let us see how much Beatrice enjoys her country club when her precious son is facing 10 years in a federal penitentiary." Harrison stopped writing and looked up from his legal pad. His eyes were sharp, calculating the exact timeline we needed. He explained that a federal indictment required meticulous preparation. We needed to trace the exact routing numbers, map the corporate structure of the Delaware Shell Company, and secure the necessary warrants from a federal judge. If Caleb caught even a slight hint that the authorities were investigating his financial transactions, he might panic and attempt to move the funds offshore, where recovering them would become an absolute nightmare. "You need to buy us time, Madeline," Harrison said, leaning across the mahogany desk. "You need to go back to that house and give the performance of your life. You have to make Caleb believe that his threat completely shattered you. You need to make him feel like he is the smartest man in the room and that you are utterly terrified of losing your company. Give him exactly what he wants. Let him get comfortable. Let his guard drop entirely." I understood the assignment perfectly. In business negotiations, the most dangerous position is when your opponent believes they have forced you into total submission. I left Harrison's office, drove back to the suburbs, and prepared to swallow my pride for the sake of the ultimate victory. When I walked through the front door of our house, Caleb was sitting on the sofa watching television with a smug, relaxed posture. He did not even bother to stand up. He just smirked at me, expecting a fight. Instead, I let my shoulders slump. I forced my breathing to become shallow and uneven. I looked at the floor, refusing to meet his eyes, playing the role of a desperate, terrified woman cornered by her powerful husband. "You win, Caleb," I said, my voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. "I cannot fight you on this. The Series B funding round is at a critical stage. If you file for a messy public divorce right now, the venture capitalists will pull their $50 million investment and my board of directors will force me out. Please do not touch my company. I will do whatever you want." The sheer triumph that washed over Caleb's face was sickening. His ego inflated, instantly filling the entire room. He stood up slowly, walking toward me like a conquering king. He actually reached out and patted my head as if I were a disobedient dog that had finally learned its place. "I told you it did not have to be difficult, Madeline," Caleb said, his tone dripping with patronizing arrogance. "You just needed a harsh reminder of how the real world works. I am your husband. I protect this family. You are going to let Vanessa keep that money, and you are going to smile while she buys her dream house." I nodded meekly, staring at his expensive shoes. "Yes, Caleb, I will let it go." But Caleb was not finished. Narcissists are never satisfied with a simple surrender. They require a public spectacle of their dominance. He crossed his arms and delivered his next set of demands. "My mother is still extremely upset about your disrespectful behavior at the restaurant." Caleb continued. "You embarrassed her. So you are going to make it right. Vanessa is hosting a massive housewarming party at her new mansion this weekend. She is inviting all of her influencer friends, and my mother is bringing her entire social circle from the country club. You are going to pay for the entire event. You are going to hire the best caterers, the most expensive decorators, and you are going to attend the party playing the role of the generous, supportive sister-in-law." I kept my eyes lowered, masking the lethal satisfaction burning inside me. This was better than I could have ever planned. He was practically organizing his own crime scene and inviting an audience to witness it. "I will pay for the party, Caleb," I promised, my voice small and defeated. "I will make sure it is exactly what your mother and Vanessa want." The next morning, I met Beatrice and Vanessa at a luxury event planning office downtown. They were absolutely glowing with victorious malice. They believed they had successfully broken the cold-hearted chief executive officer. They walked into the meeting room wearing designer clothes funded by my stolen money, acting like royalty. Vanessa slammed a thick binder of party concepts onto the glass table. "I want a champagne tower right in the foyer," Vanessa demanded, pointing her manicured finger at the event planner. "I want imported white roses everywhere. We need a live jazz quartet for the older guests and a professional disc jockey for the evening crowd. Oh, and I need an oyster bar and beluga caviar circulating all night." Beatrice sipped her sparkling water, looking at me with pure, unadulterated contempt. "Make sure you put down your premium corporate credit card for all of this, Madeline," Beatrice commanded, a nasty smirk playing on her lips. "We are inviting the most elite families in Chicago. We need to show them that my son married a woman who finally understands her financial duties to her superiors. Do not embarrass us by being cheap." I pulled out a secondary platinum card, one I had specifically isolated for this exact charade, and handed it directly to the event planner. "Spare no expense," I told the planner, putting on a flawless display of forced obedience. "Give them everything they are asking for. The budget is unlimited." Vanessa squealed with delight, clapping her hands together. Beatrice leaned back in her chair looking incredibly satisfied. They spent the next 2 hours ordering thousands of dollars worth of ice sculptures, premium liquor, and custom lighting fixtures. They treated me like a silent ATM machine, completely ignoring my presence, unless they needed my signature on a vendor contract. They were absolutely euphoric. They thought they had backed me into a corner where I was forced to fund their extravagant delusions. They thought my silence was the silence of a broken woman desperately trying to save her educational technology company from a ruinous divorce. They had absolutely no idea that while I sat there nodding at their ridiculous demands, Harrison was finalizing the wire fraud indictment with a federal prosecutor. They did not know that every signature I provided for the party vendors was just buying the Federal Bureau of Investigation the crucial 48 hours they needed to trace the stolen $300,000 through the Delaware Shell Company. I watched Beatrice and Vanessa celebrate their fake wealth and their stolen mansion. I smiled internally. Let them enjoy the caviar. Let them order the imported roses and the champagne towers. I was giving them the most spectacular stage imaginable for their absolute destruction. The illusion of their victory was the perfect trap, and they were walking right into it blindly and eagerly. The evening of the housewarming party arrived with a sickening display of stolen opulence. The sprawling $1.2 million mansion in the northern suburbs was practically vibrating with loud jazz music and the obnoxious chatter of the Chicago elite. Caleb and Beatrice had truly spared no expense using the platinum corporate credit card I had handed them. The grand foyer featured a towering 6-level champagne fountain surrounded by thousands of imported white roses. A professional string quartet played in the corner of the massive living room, while uniformed waitstaff circulated with silver trays of fresh oysters and beluga caviar. Beatrice stood near the grand marble staircase wearing an emerald silk gown that easily cost $5,000. She was holding court with a group of wealthy country club socialites and several high-profile venture capitalists she had specifically invited to validate her manufactured status. I stood quietly near the edge of the room, holding a simple glass of sparkling water, playing my assigned role flawlessly. I wore a plain black dress, intentionally making myself fade into the background while they paraded around in their stolen glory. I listened as Beatrice laughed, a loud, grating sound projecting her voice so the entire room could hear her. "Yes, Richard, my Caleb is simply a financial genius," she boasted to a prominent real estate developer. "He closed a massive logistics deal last quarter and decided to buy this beautiful estate entirely in cash for his little sister. A true patriarch always provides for his family. We are just so incredibly blessed to have a son who understands the value of generational wealth." The sheer delusion was astounding. She was openly bragging to elite investors about a real estate transaction funded entirely by a fraudulent wire transfer. She was building her social empire on a foundation of federal felonies, and she was doing it with an arrogant smile on her face. Vanessa was even worse. She marched through the crowded living room holding her smartphone attached to a blinding ring light, broadcasting a live stream to her thousands of internet followers. She wore a sparkling designer cocktail dress and waved her heavy diamond engagement ring directly into the camera lens. "Welcome to my brand new estate, everyone," Vanessa squealed, spinning around to show off the vaulted ceilings and the expensive catering staff. "My billionaire brother Caleb just handed me the keys today. This is what happens when you have a family that truly values success and loyalty. We are throwing the party of the century tonight." She paraded through the crowd, soaking up the attention until she spotted me standing quietly by the catering station. A wicked, calculating gleam flashed in her eyes. This was her moment to assert dominance. She turned her camera lens directly toward my face, ensuring her entire online audience could see me standing alone. "Oh, look, guys, it is my sister-in-law, Madeline," Vanessa announced, marching right up to my personal space and shoving the bright ring light into my eyes. "Say hello to the live stream, Madeline. You know, guys, Madeline is so incredibly lucky my brother married her. She comes from a very humble blue-collar background, but Caleb gave her a respectable life and a real family. She has a cute little software side hustle, but Caleb is the real provider here." She paused, looking me up and down with blatant disgust. Actually, Madeline, be a darling and go fetch me a fresh glass of vintage champagne and a plate of caviar. My glass is empty, and the waitstaff is just too slow. Make yourself useful for once. The room around us grew slightly quieter as several guests turned to watch the exchange. They were waiting to see if I would cause a scene. I looked directly into the camera lens. I did not glare. I did not flinch or defend my dignity. I gave a soft, perfectly compliant smile. Of course, Vanessa, I said, my voice meek and subservient. I will get that for you right away. I turned around and walked toward the catering kitchen. I could hear Vanessa laughing with her online followers behind my back, calling me a freeloader who finally learned her place in the family hierarchy. Every single humiliating word she broadcasted to the internet was being permanently recorded. It was public, undeniable proof of their motive, their greed, and their absolute belief that my money was their personal property. They were providing the authorities with a digital confession wrapped in a bow. While I carried a silver tray of caviar back to his sister, I spotted Caleb standing on the outdoor patio. He was smoking a thick, imported cigar, surrounded by 3 prominent technology investors Beatrice had lured to the party to inflate his ego. He was holding a glass of expensive scotch and gesturing widely, playing the role of the visionary entrepreneur. I walked close enough to hear his exact words blending into the shadows near the patio glass doors. Yes, my wife has a nice little educational software platform. Caleb boasted, blowing a cloud of thick cigar smoke into the crisp evening air. But I am the one who handles the actual financial structuring and the back-end algorithms. She writes the basic code, but I secure the funding rounds. I basically built the company valuation from the ground up. You know how it is, gentlemen, women have the emotional ideas, but it takes a man to execute the real capital and scale the business. The investors nodded politely, clearly impressed by his absolute confidence and the extravagant display of wealth surrounding them. He was actively stealing credit for my 80-hour work weeks, my sleepless nights, and my intellectual property while standing in a mansion purchased with my stolen cash. He felt utterly invincible. He truly believed his threat of a brutal divorce had completely broken my spirit and turned me into a silent, obedient servant who would fund his entire existence out of sheer terror. I walked back into the main dining hall carrying the silver tray. I handed Vanessa her champagne and caviar, bowing my head slightly as she snatched it from my hands without a single word of thanks. Beatrice walked past me, intentionally bumping her shoulder hard against mine and whispering a toxic insult about my cheap dress not fitting in with her elite guests. I absorbed every single hit. I let them push me down. I let them treat me like dirt. I let them bask in the absolute illusion of their total victory. I checked my watch, noting the exact time. It was almost 8 o'clock in the evening. The stage was perfectly set. The audience of elite investors and country club socialites was fully captivated. My family-in-law had climbed to the absolute highest peak of their arrogant delusion. And the higher they climbed, the more devastating the impact would be when I finally shattered the ground beneath their feet. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 8. The sophisticated jazz quartet packed up their instruments, making way for the professional disc jockey Vanessa had demanded. As the heavy bass filled the vaulted ceilings of the mansion, the atmosphere shifted from polite networking to aggressive intoxication. The elite guests loosened their ties, and the expensive liquor flowed without any restraint. Caleb was leading the charge. He had abandoned his imported cigar for a crystal decanter of 20-year-old scotch, pouring generous measures for a group of his former college fraternity brothers and a few high-profile venture capitalists Beatrice had practically begged to attend. I positioned myself perfectly by the grand marble fireplace. I was close enough to hear every single syllable spoken in their circle, but far enough away to blend into the shadows of the floral arrangements. I pulled my smartphone from my small black clutch. I kept my face turned toward the floor, maintaining the illusion of a defeated, obedient wife, while my thumbs smoothly swiped to open the hidden voice recording application. I pressed the red circular button and slipped the phone into the shallow pocket of my dress. The high-definition microphone was actively capturing the digital confession I needed. Caleb was swaying slightly on his feet, his face flushed red from the heavy alcohol consumption. The arrogant facade of a polished businessman was slipping away, replaced entirely by the loud, obnoxious bragging of a mediocre man desperate for validation. He threw his arm around the shoulder of a prominent real estate investor, spilling a few drops of scotch onto the pristine Persian rug. You gentlemen have to understand how the modern tech industry actually operates. Caleb projected his slurred voice over the pulsing music, ensuring everyone within a 20-foot radius could hear his grand declaration. The media loves a good underdog story. They love the narrative of a poor, struggling woman building an educational empire from scratch. But that is just public relations. It is all optics for the venture capital firms. The group of men chuckled, sipping their drinks and leaning in closer to hear his insider secrets. I stood perfectly still, letting the recording application capture the crisp, high-quality audio of his spectacular delusion. My wife is a fantastic coder, do not get me wrong. Caleb continued, waving his empty glass in the air. But she is basically a lucky puppet, a figurehead we use to secure diversity grants and good press. Do you honestly think a woman who grew up clipping coupons knows the first thing about corporate structuring or aggressive asset scaling? Of course not. I am the actual strategic brain behind the entire operation. I manage the financial architecture. I dictate where the capital goes. Without my financial engineering, her little autism software would have gone bankrupt 3 years ago. A few of the men nodded in agreement, feeding his massive ego. Caleb took another heavy gulp of scotch, completely blind to the trap closing around him. He felt so powerful standing in a $1 million mansion surrounded by luxury that he decided to take his boasting a step further. He decided to brag about the specific financial power he wielded over my life. Just look at this magnificent property we are standing in right now. Caleb boasted, gesturing wildly at the vaulted ceilings and the towering champagne fountain. Madeline wanted to leave our capital sitting in some boring, low-yield mutual fund. Women are always so incredibly risk-averse, but a real businessman knows how to move liquidity. I orchestrated the transfer of $300,000 to secure this estate for my family. I did not even need her permission to move the capital. I just executed the paperwork through my own corporate channels. That is what being the head of the household truly means. You take control of the assets and you multiply them while the wife plays on her computer. I felt a sharp, thrilling jolt of adrenaline course through my veins. He had just handed me the absolute holy grail of legal evidence. He had just stated on a crystal-clear audio recording that he moved $300,000 of marital funds, without my permission, through his own private corporate channels. He was publicly confessing to federal wire fraud while trying to impress a group of intoxicated country club elites. I smiled. It was a terrifying, razor-sharp smile hidden completely by the shadows of the fireplace. Every single arrogant word spilling from his mouth was another iron bar locking his federal prison cell. He wanted to claim credit for my 80-hour work weeks. He wanted to call me a lucky puppet. He wanted to brag about stealing my money to fund this grotesque display of fake wealth. He had no idea that the silent, obedient woman standing 10 feet away was currently translating his drunken boasts into a watertight federal indictment. I watched him laugh loudly with his friends, completely intoxicated by his own manufactured brilliance. He truly believed he had beaten the system. He believed his superficial knowledge of family law and a forged signature had granted him total dominance over my life and my multi-million-dollar company. He was experiencing the blinding euphoria of a narcissist who thinks they have finally crushed their victim into permanent submission. I reached into my pocket and gently tapped the screen of my phone, saving the audio file to a secure encrypted cloud server. I immediately forwarded a copy directly to Harrison's private email address. The evidence was secured, the motive was established, the confession was fully documented. I looked up at the grand staircase where Vanessa was posing for another live stream, and Beatrice was loudly demanding the catering staff bring out more beluga caviar. They were all suffocating in their own arrogance. They had spent the entire evening treating me like dirt, treating my money like their personal birthright, and treating the law like a minor inconvenience they could easily bypass. The clock was ticking. The intoxicating illusion of their grand victory had reached its absolute limit. I took a deep breath, smoothing down the front of my simple black dress. It was time to stop playing the victim. It was time to pull the trigger and watch their magnificent stolen empire burn to ashes right in front of their eyes. The heavy bass of the music vibrated through the floorboards of the massive living room. I stood quietly near the grand marble fireplace, letting the obnoxious sounds of the party wash over me. The celebration had reached its absolute peak of arrogant indulgence. Guests were laughing loudly, spilling expensive liquor, and reveling in the fake prestige of the evening. I reached into my small black clutch and pulled out my smartphone. The screen illuminated with a single encrypted text message from Harrison. It read simply that he was inside the perimeter. While Beatrice and Vanessa were busy parading around the ground floor, soaking up the attention of the Chicago elite, Harrison had slipped through the caterer's entrance. He had bypassed the security staff and made his way up the grand staircase entirely unnoticed. He was currently standing in the master study on the second floor of this very mansion. He was not alone up there. He had brought the official federal freezing order signed by a federal judge just hours ago. The document resting in his leather briefcase authorized the immediate seizure of all assets tied to the Delaware Shell Company. Harrison was actively communicating with the federal agents parked in unmarked vehicles at the end of the gated driveway. The perimeter was entirely secure. The authorities were standing by. The invisible net I had spent days weaving was finally pulled tight. I slipped my phone back into my purse, feeling a massive surge of pure adrenaline. I did not have to pretend to be a defeated woman anymore. The final act of their destruction was about to commence. Suddenly, the loud club music cut off abruptly. The sudden silence in the massive living room caused a wave of confusion among the wealthy guests. People stopped talking and turned their heads toward the grand marble staircase. Then the sharp, crisp sound of a silver spoon tapping against crystal echoed through the foyer. Beatrice stood on the landing of the lower staircase looking like a queen demanding total submission from her subjects. She held her champagne flute high, her emerald silk gown shimmering under the massive crystal chandelier. She waited with a smug, entitled expression until every single eye in the room was locked onto her. "Ladies and gentlemen," Beatrice announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness and sheer arrogance, "if I could please have your attention for just a moment. Tonight is a truly spectacular occasion. We are gathered here in this magnificent estate to celebrate the beautiful future of my daughter Vanessa. As a mother, my heart is absolutely bursting with pride. But this night is about more than just a new house. It is about the power of family and the importance of traditional values." She paused, taking a slow, dramatic sip of her champagne. She looked directly at Caleb, who was leaning against the custom bar, beaming with drunken pride. "We all know that success means nothing if you do not share it with the people who raised you." Beatrice continued, projecting her voice to ensure the venture capitalists and country club socialites hung on her every word. "My son Caleb is a shining example of a true provider. He has always understood his duty to this family. He worked tirelessly to secure this $1.2 million property for his little sister. He is the brilliant financial architect of his household. And tonight we also want to acknowledge his wife Madeline." Beatrice turned her sharp, predatory gaze toward the shadows where I stood. The crowd parted slightly, creating a clear physical path between me and the grand staircase. "Madeline, darling, please come up here," Beatrice commanded. It was not a request. It was an absolute order disguised as an invitation. She wanted to humiliate me on the largest stage possible. She wanted to force the successful chief executive officer to publicly bow down and hand over her wealth to her worthless sister-in-law. Vanessa immediately stepped up next to her mother, holding her smartphone high in the air. The bright ring light illuminated her smug, grinning face. She was broadcasting this exact moment to thousands of viewers online. She wanted the entire internet to witness my absolute surrender. "Do not be shy, Madeline," Beatrice mocked, her tones sickeningly patronizing. "Step into the light. We know you did not grow up with this kind of wealth or sophistication. We know you come from very humble working-class beginnings. But Caleb has guided you so well. He has taught you the importance of financial generosity. Tonight, you are going to officially present the $300,000 housewarming gift to Vanessa in front of all our esteemed guests. You are going to show everyone that you finally understand your place in this family." The elite crowd clapped politely, murmuring their approval of Beatrice and her highly fabricated narrative. Caleb raised his glass of scotch toward me, his eyes flashing with a ruthless, victorious glare. He thought he had completely broken me. He thought his threat of a hostile divorce had forced me to swallow my pride and accept my role as their personal bank account. I stepped out of the shadows. I did not keep my head down. I did not slump my shoulders or show a single ounce of hesitation. I walked across the imported Persian rugs with the exact same dominant posture I used when walking into a hostile boardroom. My face was completely devoid of fear. I wore a calm, chilling smile that immediately caused a ripple of unease among the closest guests. I ascended the first few steps of the marble staircase until I was standing directly adjacent to Beatrice and Vanessa. The bright glare of the ring light hit my face, but I did not blink. Vanessa shoved a gold-plated microphone into my hand, her diamond engagement ring catching the light. "Go ahead, Madeline," Vanessa whispered maliciously, covering the microphone with her hand for a split second. "Tell everyone how happy you are to give me your money. We have 5,000 people watching right now. Smile for the camera, or my brother will take half your company tomorrow." She pulled her hand away and pointed the lens right at my face. I gripped the cool metal of the microphone. I looked out over the sea of wealthy investors, socialites, and drunken fraternity brothers. I looked at Caleb, who was standing by the bar waiting for his ultimate public triumph. I looked at Beatrice, who was practically vibrating with toxic joy. I brought the microphone to my lips. My voice echoed through the massive living room, crisp, clear, and radiating absolute authority. "Thank you, Beatrice." I began, my tone perfectly smooth and entirely polite. "You are absolutely right. Family is incredibly important. And you are also right that Caleb has shown his true colors when it comes to financial architecture. It takes a very specific kind of man to orchestrate a transaction of this magnitude." I paused, letting the silence stretch for 2 agonizing seconds. I turned to look directly into the lens of Vanessa's broadcasting smartphone, ensuring every single one of her followers heard my next words. "I was asked to stand up here and publicly announce a $300,000 gift for Vanessa." I continued, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous octave, but I decided that a simple verbal announcement was not nearly enough for an occasion this monumental. I believe in total transparency. I believe in showing the receipts. So of course, Mother, I have an even better gift, and I am ready to project it on the massive 85-inch television screen right behind us. I pressed a small remote I had concealed in the palm of my left hand. The massive 85-inch television screen mounted on the wall directly behind the grand staircase flickered to life. Beatrice and Vanessa immediately turned around, expecting to see a heartwarming slideshow of family photographs, or perhaps a digital oversized check confirming my financial submission. Caleb took a step forward from the bar, holding his glass of scotch high, anticipating his moment of ultimate glory. The screen did not display family photographs. It did not display a message of congratulations or a celebration of traditional family values. The display lit up the dimly lit living room with the stark, glaring white background of official banking documents. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of elite guests. I watched the high-profile venture capitalists and corporate executives in the room narrow their eyes as they immediately recognized the layout of a central bank wire transfer authorization form. The document was magnified to fill the entire 85-inch display. Dead center on the screen was a massive, glaring red stamp from the compliance department, marking the transaction as officially processed and cleared. I raised the microphone to my mouth. My voice cut through the stunned silence with surgical precision. "What you are looking at is an outbound electronic wire transfer for exactly $300,000. I announced, letting the sheer magnitude of the number echo off the vaulted ceilings. "It was executed 2 days ago from my joint investment account. The money was moved to secure the purchase of this exact $1.2 million estate. Beatrice just told you all that Caleb is a brilliant financial architect, providing for his family. Let us look a little closer at his architecture." I clicked the remote again. The presentation zoomed in on the bottom right corner of the banking document. My name was printed there, and right above it was a signature. "Take a good look at that signature," I instructed the crowd. "It looks very similar to mine." but I was delivering a keynote speech to 300 educators at the exact moment this form was submitted in person at the downtown branch. Caleb forged my signature to bypass the dual authorization security protocols of a federally insured bank. He lied directly to the branch manager, submitting a fraudulent affidavit to push this transaction through. That is not financial genius, that is federal wire fraud. The silence in the mansion became absolutely deafening. The kind of heavy, suffocating silence that occurs right before a massive structural collapse. The wealthy country club socialites, who had just been praising Beatrice, now stared at the screen in pure horror. The venture capitalists, the men who moved millions of dollars for a living, shifted uncomfortably, setting their drinks down on the nearest tables. They understood the law. They knew exactly what a forged wire transfer meant. They realized they were currently standing inside a property purchased with stolen funds, making this entire lavish housewarming party an active crime scene. Caleb froze completely. His glass of expensive scotch slipped from his fingers, shattering against the imported hardwood floor. The sharp sound of breaking crystal was the only noise in the room. His face drained of all color, turning a sickly shade of pale gray. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the click beneath his boot. Beatrice let out a strangled, high-pitched noise. She desperately waved her arms, trying to physically block the massive television screen, but she looked utterly ridiculous. Her emerald silk gown swished wildly as she frantically looked around for a remote control to shut off the display. "Madeline, turn that off right now!" Beatrice hissed, her voice trembling with panic and fury. "This is a private family matter. You are ruining the party. Turn it off." I completely ignored her frantic demands. I clicked the remote for the third time. The screen transitioned away from the forged wire transfer and displayed a new set of highly sensitive legal documents. These papers bore the official seal of the state of Delaware. I am not quite finished with the housewarming gifts, I declared, keeping my posture perfectly dominant. Beatrice told you that Caleb bought this magnificent home for his sister Vanessa. Let us look at the property deed and the corporate registration. The screen highlighted the name of the purchasing entity. It was not Vanessa's name. It was not even Caleb's personal name. It was a limited liability company. This house was not purchased for Vanessa. I explained, projecting my voice so the thousands of people watching the live stream could hear the truth. The funds were wired directly into a corporate shell company registered in Delaware, a state famous for providing total corporate anonymity. Caleb is listed as the sole proprietor of this hidden entity. He did not buy his sister a house. He used my stolen money to purchase a hidden asset to tarnish my liquidity because he planned to file for a hostile divorce and hide his wealth from the family courts. Vanessa stopped breathing. Her hand, which was still holding her smartphone high in the air, began to shake violently. The bright ring light cast a harsh glow on her horrified face. She slowly turned her head to look at her brother. The illusion of the generous billionaire sibling had just been violently ripped away. "Vanessa," I said, turning my body to face her directly. "Read the documents on the screen behind you. Your name is nowhere on the deed. You do not own this mansion. You are nothing more than a tenant occupying a property owned by a shell company. Your brother can legally evict you and throw you out on the street tomorrow morning if he wants to liquidate the asset. You are throwing a housewarming party for a house you do not even own." Vanessa looked at the 85-inch screen and then looked down at her phone. The live chat on her broadcast was exploding with thousands of comments from her followers. Her entire online audience had just watched me prove that her luxurious influencer lifestyle was a complete and utter fraud. She was not a wealthy homeowner. She was a pawn in her brother's criminal asset dissipation scheme. The elite guests began murmuring, exchanging shocked glances, and whispering behind their hands. The facade of the perfect, wealthy, successful family was entirely annihilated. I stood on the staircase looking down at the people who had treated me like dirt just minutes prior. I had not shed a single tear. I had not raised my voice in anger. I had simply used the cold, hard, undeniable truth to destroy their entire world. The evidence was displayed in brilliant high definition for the absolute worst possible audience they could have imagined. I kept the microphone close to my mouth, ensuring the acoustics of the grand foyer carried every single syllable to the farthest corners of the room. I turned my body slightly so I was directly facing Vanessa. She was still holding her smartphone in the air, but her arm was visibly trembling. The ring light cast a harsh, unnatural glare on her pale skin, revealing the absolute panic setting into her features. "Vanessa, do you really think your brother bought this magnificent mansion for you?" I asked, my voice echoing off the marble floors. "Do you honestly believe he handed you the keys to a $1.2 million estate out of the goodness of his heart?" "No, he did not. He used the name of a corporate shell company to secure the property deed. He did this to hide my stolen assets because he was planning to blindside me with a hostile divorce. You are not a homeowner, Vanessa. You are just a tenant living in a house without a single legally binding contract. And your loving brother can throw you out on the street at any given moment the second he needs to liquidate this property to pay his criminal defense attorneys." The heavy crystal champagne flute slipped from Vanessa's manicured fingers. It hit the marble staircase and shattered into dozens of jagged pieces, sending expensive liquor splashing across the pristine steps and onto the hem of her designer dress. She did not even flinch at the sound of the breaking glass. She stared at the massive 85-inch television screen, reading the corporate registration documents over and over again. Her entire identity was built on the illusion of wealth and status. Her internet persona relied on portraying a life of effortless luxury provided by a fiercely loyal, wealthy family. I had just dismantled her entire reality live on her own broadcast. I could see the reflection of her smartphone screen in the glass railing of the staircase. The live chat was moving so incredibly fast, it was just a blur of text. Thousands of strangers were witnessing the ultimate humiliation of a fake influencer. They were typing out her downfall in real time, calling her a fraud, a squatter, and a pawn in a federal crime. The digital empire she valued more than human connection was burning to the ground before her very eyes. She slowly lowered the phone, her mouth opening and closing as she desperately tried to formulate a lie that could save her brand. But there was absolutely no lie powerful enough to counter certified legal documents displayed in high definition. Beatrice could not handle the destruction of her golden child. The polished country club matriarch snapped entirely. Her face turned a violent shade of crimson and the veins in her neck strained against her pearl necklace. She lunged forward, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You are a liar, Madeline!" Beatrice screamed, her voice cracking with raw, unhinged fury. "You fabricated those documents to ruin my family. You are a vindictive, jealous woman who cannot stand to see my children happy. Caleb bought this house for his sister because he loves her. He is a good man. He is the provider. You forged those corporate papers just to embarrass us in front of our friends. You are making all of this up because you are an insecure peasant who wants to drag us down to your miserable level." The sheer desperation in her screams was almost pathetic. She was shrieking at me while standing directly beneath a giant screen displaying the official state seal of Delaware. I did not raise my voice to match her hysteria. I simply looked down at her with absolute pity. "You can scream all you want, Beatrice," I said calmly into the microphone. "But the state authorities do not issue official corporate seals for fabricated documents. You can ask any of the prominent venture capitalists you invited tonight. They handle these exact corporate structures every single day. They know exactly what asset dissipation looks like. They know I am telling the truth, and they know your son is a federal criminal." I swept my gaze across the room. The elite guests, the people Beatrice had desperately tried to impress, were actively backing away from her. The wealthy socialites were whispering to each other, casting disgusted glances at Caleb and Beatrice. The investors were already typing on their phones, likely texting their legal teams to sever any potential ties with my husband. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with a man facing an indictment for wire fraud. The social contagion of being associated with a federal crime was spreading through the room, and Beatrice was standing right at ground zero. Vanessa finally snapped out of her paralyzed state. She dropped her smartphone onto the stairs, entirely abandoning her live stream. She whipped around to face Caleb, who was still frozen near the custom bar. "Caleb, is she telling the truth?" Vanessa shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the room. "Did you put this house under a fake company? Do I not own this property? Tell me she is lying, Caleb. Tell me you did not use me as a cover for a divorce scheme." Caleb opened his mouth, but no words came out. His face was drenched in cold sweat. He looked at the massive screen displaying his hidden corporate entity. He looked at his sister, who was staring at him with absolute betrayal. He looked at his mother, who was hyperventilating and clutching her chest. He was entirely trapped in a cage built from his own immense greed. The golden boy, the self-proclaimed financial architect, had been exposed as a common thief who used his own flesh and blood as human shields. I stood on the marble staircase, watching the familial bonds disintegrate. They had built their entire dynamic on money status and the exploitation of my hard work. Now that the money was proven to be stolen and the status was completely shattered, they had absolutely no loyalty left for each other. They were turning into cornered animals ready to tear each other apart to survive the fallout. I held the microphone steady, perfectly positioned to deliver the next blow. The panic in Caleb's eyes finally morphed into absolute, unhinged desperation. The sheer magnitude of his public execution had broken whatever fragile grip he had on his sanity. He looked around the lavish living room, realizing that his mother Beatrice could not scream her way out of this situation. He realized his sister Vanessa could not manipulate her online followers to save him. He was standing completely exposed in a room full of Chicago elites who were actively stepping away from him, as if he carried a highly contagious disease. His chest heaved rapidly. His hands curled into tight, aggressive fists at his sides. The cowardice that defined his entire existence was suddenly replaced by a surge of violent, animalistic panic. He let out a raw, guttural shout that echoed violently off the vaulted ceilings of the mansion. "Madeline, shut your mouth right now!" Caleb roared, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. He lunged forward, closing the distance between the custom bar and the grand marble staircase in 3 massive strides. He intended to charge up the steps, tackle me to the solid stone ground, and physically tear the gold-plated microphone from my hands. He wanted to shatter the broadcasting device into 1,000,000 pieces. He wanted to silence the undeniable truth ringing through the grand foyer. He genuinely thought he could use brute physical force to stop a federal indictment from destroying his life. He did not even make it to the first marble step. Before Caleb's polished leather shoes could touch the base of the staircase, 2 tall, broad-shouldered men in dark tailored suits materialized from the crowded floor. They moved with a terrifying synchronized efficiency that no private security guard or country club bouncer possessed. These were not hired caterers. These were not wealthy party guests. These were the undercover federal agents Harrison had stationed strategically around the perimeter of the room, waiting for exactly this moment. The first agent stepped directly into Caleb's path, planting his feet firmly and driving a rigid forearm straight into Caleb's chest. The heavy impact stopped my husband dead in his tracks, knocking the wind completely out of his lungs. Caleb stumbled backward, gasping desperately for air, but the second agent was already there, moving with tactical precision. The second man grabbed Caleb's right arm, twisting it swiftly and painfully behind his back in a textbook submission hold. Caleb let out a sharp cry of pain as his upper body was forcefully shoved downward toward the expensive Persian rug. "Let me go!" Caleb shouted, struggling futilely against the iron grip of the federal agents. "You cannot touch me in my own house. Take your hands off me right now." I looked down at the man who had threatened to destroy my educational technology company. I looked at the man who had promised to drag my name through a brutal family court battle and extort me for 50% of my hard-earned assets. He was currently pinned and completely neutralized by federal authorities, thrashing around like a trapped rat. I brought the microphone back to my lips. My voice remained perfectly steady, cold, and completely devoid of any human sympathy. I did not need to shout to establish my dominance. The heavy, shocked silence of the crowd ensured my words carried the lethal weight of a judge's final verdict. "Did you honestly think you could use Illinois divorce laws to threaten me, Caleb?" I asked, projecting my voice so every single venture capitalist and socialite in the room could hear the absolute finality of his defeat. Did you really believe your amateur internet searches about marital asset dissipation gave you the ultimate leverage over my life and my company? Caleb thrashed against the agents, gritting his teeth in intense pain and public humiliation. Beatrice screamed his name from the sidelines, her voice shrill and trembling, but she was too terrified of the men in suits to step any closer to her golden boy. You made a catastrophic miscalculation. I continued staring directly into his panicked eyes. You thought we were playing a simple game in family court. You thought this was a standard civil dispute over who gets to keep the vacation money or the investment portfolio. But forging my signature to withdraw $300,000 from a federally insured bank is not a civil dispute. It is a federal felony. I paused, letting the word felony hang heavily in the air. The wealthy investors in the room nodded slowly, entirely comprehending the massive legal avalanche that was currently crushing my husband. They understood the severe boundaries of corporate and financial law. You did not just steal from your wife, Caleb. I explained, my tone shifting into the clinical, ruthless precision of a corporate executive finalizing a hostile takeover. You committed wire fraud across state lines. You intentionally bypassed the dual authorization security protocols of a major financial institution by submitting a fraudulent sworn affidavit to a bank manager. That specific crime carries a maximum sentence of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Caleb stopped struggling. The physical fight drained completely out of his body as the horrifying reality of his situation finally pierced through his thick layer of arrogance. He was not going to family court to fight over alimony. He was going to federal prison to serve a criminal sentence. And as for this magnificent mansion you so generously purchased for your sister, I said, gesturing broadly to the towering ceilings, the crystal chandeliers, and the extravagant champagne fountain. You seem to have conveniently forgotten the basic legal principles of asset forfeiture. You cannot use the direct proceeds of a federal crime to purchase real estate and expect to keep it. Vanessa let out a loud, sobbing gasp, covering her face with her trembling hands. She finally understood exactly what I was saying. She understood that her fake influencer lifestyle was entirely over, and her wealthy persona was dead. This house is an asset purchased directly with illicit funds, I declared, delivering the final undeniable blow. The $300,000 you wired into your Delaware shell company was stolen money. Therefore, every single brick, every single hardwood floorboard, and every single blade of grass on this $1.2 million estate is legally classified as the fruit of a criminal enterprise. You do not own this property, Caleb. Vanessa does not own this property. I looked around the room, locking eyes with Beatrice, who was shaking uncontrollably against the staircase banister, clutching her chest in pure agony. This entire estate is currently subject to immediate federal seizure, I announced, my voice echoing with absolute, unwavering triumph. The silence that followed was total and complete. I had not just defeated them in a trivial argument, I had completely eradicated their entire existence. I had taken their theft, their arrogance, and their shameless manipulation, and I had weaponized it to execute the perfect legal destruction. The piercing shriek of federal sirens shattered the heavy silence in the grand living room. The aggressive blare of the approaching vehicles cut through the crisp evening air, growing louder and more dominant by the second. Suddenly, the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the mansion were flooded with violently flashing red and blue lights. The strobe effect cast harsh, shifting shadows across the terrified faces of the elite guests. They realized instantly that this was not a bluff. This was a fully coordinated federal raid. The heavy mahogany front doors of the estate swung open with a resounding crash. A team of uniformed federal agents wearing tactical gear emblazoned with the Federal Bureau of Investigation insignia marched into the grand foyer. Their boots hit the imported marble floors with a heavy rhythmic thud that completely destroyed the last remaining illusion of a sophisticated high society gathering. Harrison stepped out from the shadows near the grand staircase. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket and nodded to the lead federal agent. The coordination was absolute. Harrison had timed the arrival of the authorities perfectly to coincide with the absolute peak of my presentation. He wanted maximum exposure and maximum humiliation for the man who tried to steal my empire. The lead agent walked straight toward Caleb. Caleb was still pinned against the Persian rug by the two undercover operatives. His expensive custom suit wrinkled and his face pale with utter terror. "Caleb, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and the unlawful transfer of funds across state lines." The lead agent announced, his voice booming with undeniable authority. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." The harsh metallic clink of steel handcuffs echoed sharply through the room. The agents forcefully pulled Caleb's arms behind his back and locked the cold, heavy cuffs around his wrists. The sound was incredibly satisfying. It was the sound of a parasite finally being forcefully removed from its host. Caleb completely broke down. The arrogant man who had proudly boasted about his financial dominance just 10 minutes prior was now crying like a pathetic, helpless child. He dropped to his knees as the agents hauled him upward, his legs refusing to support his own weight. "Madeline, please." Caleb sobbed, his voice cracking, pitching into a frantic, desperate whine. "Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them we are married and it was just a joint account dispute. Please do not let them take me. I will give it all back. I will sign whatever you want. Just tell them to take these cuffs off." I looked at him with absolute zero pity. I did not move a single muscle to help him. I stood my ground on the marble steps, holding my head high. "You cannot return stolen money to a federal bank and call it a misunderstanding, Caleb," I stated, my voice cutting through his pathetic whimpers. "You made your choice when you forged my signature. You made your choice when you threatened to destroy my educational technology company. You thought you were the smartest man in the room. Now you get to explain your brilliant financial architecture to a federal judge." Beatrice let out a blood-curdling scream. She rushed forward desperately, clawing at the agents, attempting to physically pull her golden boy away from the authorities. "Take your hands off my son!" Beatrice shrieked, her emerald silk gown tearing slightly at the shoulder as she flailed wildly. "He is an executive. He is a respectable man. You are arresting the wrong person. She is the one who fabricated this entire lie." One of the federal agents firmly extended his arm, creating a solid physical barrier between the hysterical mother and the handcuffed prisoner. "Mom, if you interfere with a federal arrest, I will charge you with obstruction of justice and put you in the back of the transport vehicle right next to him. Step back immediately." Beatrice froze. The threat of her own arrest was enough to snap her back into self-preservation mode. She stumbled backward, pressing her hands against her mouth, her chest heaving as she watched her son being dragged toward the front doors. I shifted my gaze to the wealthy guests. The prominent venture capitalists, the elite country club socialites, and the internet influencers had all pulled out their smartphones. They were not calling their lawyers to help Caleb. They were not stepping forward to defend Beatrice. They were actively recording the entire spectacular downfall. Dozens of high-definition camera lenses were pointed directly at Caleb as the agents marched him through the grand foyer. Flashbulbs illuminated his tear-stained face and his handcuffed wrists. The elite society members Beatrice had so desperately tried to impress were now documenting her ultimate disgrace. They were whispering to each other, sending videos to their exclusive group chats, ensuring that by tomorrow morning, the entire city of Chicago would know that the family was entirely bankrupt and facing federal prison. Vanessa was slumped against the bottom steps of the staircase, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the disaster. Her smartphone lay abandoned on the marble floor, the camera still broadcasting the live stream to her thousands of followers. Her digital audience was witnessing her brother being hauled away by federal agents in real time. Her entire brand of effortless wealth was permanently destroyed, replaced by a viral scandal of fraud and humiliation. Caleb twisted his neck, looking back at me one last time as the agents pushed him through the massive front doors. His eyes were wide, filled with pure, unadulterated fear. He realized in that final moment that he had lost absolutely everything. He had lost his freedom. He had lost his reputation. He had lost the multi-million-dollar safety net he thought he could effortlessly steal. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut behind him, cutting off his pathetic pleas. The flashing red and blue lights continued to paint the walls of the mansion, casting an eerie glow over the silent, shocked crowd of party guests. The display on the 85-inch television screen remained brightly illuminated, serving as a massive digital tombstone for their fake empire. The absolute destruction was completely beautiful. I had not laid a single finger on him. I had not screamed or thrown a tantrum. I had simply used the undeniable power of the law to crush a man who thought he could exploit my success. I watched the elite guests slowly begin to gather their expensive coats, avoiding eye contact with Beatrice, who was now weeping uncontrollably on the imported rug. The party was officially over, and the ultimate reckoning had only just begun. The heavy wooden doors sealed Caleb outside, but the chaos inside the mansion was only just beginning. The lead federal agent who had remained in the foyer stepped into the center of the room. He raised a black digital megaphone to his mouth. His voice echoed violently against the crystal chandeliers and the imported marble floors. "Attention, everyone in this building," the agent announced with absolute bureaucratic authority. "By order of a federal judge, this entire property and all assets within it are now officially seized as evidence in an ongoing federal fraud investigation. This estate is immediately classified as restricted federal property. You have exactly 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings and vacate the premises. Anyone found inside this structure after 30 minutes will be arrested and charged with criminal trespassing on federal property." The sheer panic that erupted among the wealthy Chicago elite was a spectacular sight to witness. The country club socialites and the powerful venture capitalists who had spent the last 2 hours drinking stolen champagne suddenly turned into a stampede of terrified cowards. They did not walk toward the exits, they ran. They shoved past each other, leaving behind expensive silk scarves and tailored coats in the cloakroom. The professional catering staff dropped their silver trays of beluga caviar directly onto the floor, not caring about the mess. The musicians abandoned their expensive equipment and sprinted for the service doors. Nobody wanted to be photographed exiting an active federal crime scene. Nobody wanted their license plates recorded by the government vehicles parked outside. Within 5 short minutes, the massive grand foyer was almost entirely empty. The illusion of Beatrice and her elite social standing evaporated into thin air, leaving behind nothing but broken glass and spilled liquor. Then, the harsh reality of the agent's command finally penetrated Vanessa's mind. She was sitting on the bottom step of the staircase, staring blankly at the federal officers unrolling bright yellow crime scene tape across the front doorway. "Wait!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice cracking with raw disbelief. "What do you mean vacate the premises? I live here. This is my house. All of my clothes and my expensive filming equipment are upstairs in the master suite. You cannot kick me out into the street. I have nowhere else to go." The federal agent did not even blink. He looked down at his clipboard and then back at the hysterical influencer. "Ma'am, you are not the registered owner of this property. The registered owner is a corporate entity that has just been indicted for wire fraud. You have no legal lease agreement. You have exactly 25 minutes left to grab whatever fits in a single suitcase and exit the building. Everything else remains locked inside as federal evidence." Vanessa completely lost her mind. The perfectly curated internet personality shattered into a million irreparable pieces. She threw herself flat onto the cold marble floor, thrashing her arms and kicking her legs like a giant spoiled toddler. She wailed at the top of her lungs, ruining her expensive designer dress as she rolled around in the puddle of spilled champagne and broken crystal. Her diamond engagement ring scraped harshly against the stone. She was screaming that it was not fair, crying that her entire life was ruined, and begging the federal agents to let her keep the mansion. She was completely homeless and utterly penniless, and she was throwing a spectacular tantrum while her smartphone lay a few feet away, still quietly broadcasting her pathetic breakdown to the entire internet. Beatrice was entirely paralyzed. She stood near the champagne fountain, watching her daughter rolling on the wet floor and knowing her son was currently sitting in the back of a federal transport vehicle. Her country club friends had abandoned her. Her wealthy investors had fled. Her emerald silk gown was stained, and her perfect reputation was permanently destroyed. She slowly turned her head and looked at me. I was standing near the fireplace, my posture completely relaxed. I had not broken a single sweat. Beatrice stumbled forward. Her knees gave out and she practically crawled across the imported rug, stopping right at my feet. The arrogant matriarch who had called me a greedy peasant and a blue-collar girl just an hour ago was now looking up at me with tears streaming down her ruined makeup. She reached out with trembling hands and desperately grabbed the fabric of my simple black dress. "Madeline, please." Beatrice sobbed, her voice a pathetic, desperate wheeze. "You have to stop this. You have to call the bank manager. Call the federal agents and tell them you made a mistake. Tell them Caleb had your permission to take the money. You have the power to fix this. You have $1 million company. You can buy us another house. Please do not let them take my son to prison. He is your husband. I am begging you, Madeline. Have some mercy on your family." I looked down at the woman clutching my dress. I felt absolutely no sympathy. I felt no urge to comfort her or offer a single shred of forgiveness. She had happily plotted to steal my hard-earned money to fund her own arrogant vanity. She had smiled while Caleb threatened to destroy my life and my company. Mercy was a privilege reserved for decent human beings, and she had completely disqualified herself from that category. I firmly reached down and peeled her trembling fingers off my dress, brushing the fabric clean. Harrison walked over holding my elegant tailored wool coat. He draped it smoothly over my shoulders. I slipped my arms into the sleeves and adjusted the collar with meticulous, deliberate care. I picked up my small black clutch from the mantelpiece, turning to face the weeping woman on the floor. I looked Beatrice directly in the eyes, delivering the absolute final blow. "This is federal property now, Mother," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing, lethal whisper. "Take your time and enjoy the party." I turned my back on her and walked straight toward the front doors. The federal agent stepped aside to let me pass, recognizing me as the sole victim and the undisputed victor of the night. I stepped out into the crisp, biting cold of the Chicago evening. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the driveway, but I did not look back at the mansion. I did not look back at the screaming influencer on the floor, or the sobbing matriarch begging for a mercy she did not deserve. I walked to my car, the sound of my heels clicking sharply against the pavement, echoing like a steady, victorious drumbeat in the quiet night. I had completely eradicated the toxic tumors from my life, and I was finally entirely free. 3 days passed, with the brutal efficiency of a perfectly executed corporate merger. The local Chicago media networks had an absolute field day with the spectacular scandal. The Morning Financial Gazette, sitting on my pristine glass desk, featured a massive front-page photograph of the $1.2 million mansion wrapped entirely in bright yellow federal crime scene tape. The headline detailed the shocking raid of a hidden real estate asset purchased with illicit wire transfers by a supposedly successful local businessman. I took a slow sip of my black espresso, letting the rich, bitter taste ground me in the present moment. Harrison sat across from my desk, tapping his designer pen against a thick legal folder. He had just finished briefing me on the immediate and devastating fallout of our counterattack. Beatrice had been permanently expelled from her exclusive country club the very next morning. Her wealthy elite friends treated her like a highly contagious biohazard, refusing to answer her frantic phone calls or open their doors to her. When she attempted to pay for a damage control lunch at a high-end bistro, every single one of her premium credit cards was violently declined in front of a crowded dining room. The federal authorities had moved swiftly to freeze all accounts associated with Caleb, cutting off her primary source of stolen wealth entirely. Vanessa was facing an even harsher reality in the digital world. Her influencer brand was entirely dead. Major lifestyle brands dropped her sponsorships overnight, issuing public statements distancing themselves from her fraudulent persona. Her social media comment sections were flooded with thousands of people mocking her fake billionaire lifestyle and posting screenshots of her weeping on the marble floor during the federal raid. They were completely destitute, stripped of the stolen money that gave them their manufactured arrogance, and reduced to absolute social pariahs in record time. The intercom on my mahogany desk buzzed sharply, cutting through the quiet hum of the executive suite. My assistant informed me that 2 women were currently sobbing hysterically in the ground floor lobby, causing a massive public disturbance. They were demanding to see the chief executive officer and refusing to leave until building security threatened to call the local police department. I looked at Harrison and gave a slight approving nod. I pressed the intercom button and instructed my assistant to send them up to the 40th floor. I wanted them to walk through the polished hallways of my empire. I wanted them to see exactly what they had tried to destroy, and exactly who held the absolute power over their lives. The heavy glass doors of my corner office swung open. Beatrice and Vanessa stumbled inside looking absolutely unrecognizable. The emerald silk gowns and designer cocktail dresses were gone. They wore wrinkled, uncoordinated clothing that looked like it had been pulled from the bottom of a laundry basket. Their hair was unkempt, flat, and lifeless. Their faces were swollen red and heavily blotched from 3 days of relentless crying and total panic. They looked like terrified refugees fleeing a brutal war zone of their own creation. Vanessa could not even make eye contact with me. She stared at the expensive hardwood floor, her hands trembling violently at her sides. Beatrice did not demand respect or order me around like a disobedient servant, as she had done just 72 hours ago. Her arrogant posture was entirely shattered. She practically collapsed into the leather guest chair opposite my desk, gasping for air as if she had just run a marathon. "Madeline, please, you have to listen to me." Beatrice begged, her voice a raspy, pathetic whisper. "We have absolutely nothing left. The banks locked every single account. My friends will not even speak to me. But that is not the worst part. The Internal Revenue Service agents showed up at my townhouse yesterday morning with a stack of federal warrants." Beatrice began to hyperventilate, clutching her cheap handbag to her chest. She looked at Harrison with pure terror, recognizing him as the man who orchestrated her nightmare. "They are auditing 10 years of my financial records." Beatrice sobbed uncontrollably, her tears ruining her pale face. "They are demanding explanations for undocumented income and threatening to seize my personal property for massive unpaid taxes. You have ruined us, Madeline. We are completely destroyed." But Caleb is suffering the most. He is sitting in a federal holding cell wearing an orange jumpsuit. His public defender says the federal prosecution is pushing for a 10-year prison sentence for the wire fraud conviction. 10 years, Madeline. He will not survive a decade in a federal penitentiary. You have to save your husband. Vanessa finally looked up, her face streaked with dried tears. She dropped to her knees right there on the hardwood floor of my office, bringing her hands together in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Just tell the bank manager it was a simple marital misunderstanding," Vanessa pleaded, her voice cracking with raw desperation. "Call the federal agents and tell them that you gave Caleb verbal permission to move the $300,000 to buy the house, and you just forgot about it. Tell them you were stressed with your company and made a mistake. If you just sign a legal affidavit saying the transfer was fully authorized, the authorities will drop the criminal fraud charges. They were actually begging me to commit federal perjury to save the man who tried to extort me. They still believe they could manipulate my emotions. They thought the sight of them crying and groveling on the floor of my office would somehow erase the sheer malice they had displayed when they thought they were winning. We will walk away and never bother you again," Beatrice added, sliding out of her chair and dropping to her knees right next to her daughter. "We will leave Chicago. We will do whatever you demand. Just please sign the paper and let my son come home. Do not let them lock him in a cage for 10 years. I am begging you on my hands and knees, Madeline. Have some mercy on us." I remained entirely stoic, sitting comfortably in my high-backed leather executive chair. I took another slow sip of my espresso, savoring the absolute silence that followed their pathetic begging. I looked down at the two women kneeling on my floor, stripped of their pride, their wealth, and their vicious arrogance. They wanted me to lie to the federal government to save a thief. They wanted me to risk my own freedom to protect a man who planned to steal half of my company and leave me with nothing. I set my espresso cup down on the glass desk. The sharp clink of the porcelain echoed loudly in the quiet office. I looked at Harrison, who was already sliding a thick, legally binding document out of his leather folder and placing it precisely in the center of the desk. The time for begging was over. It was time to deliver the final absolute terms of their surrender. I stood up from my executive chair and gestured toward the glass double doors of my private conference room. My movement was sharp and efficient, Beatrice and Vanessa scrambled to their feet, following me like wounded animals seeking a way out of a trap. Harrison gathered his leather portfolio and walked beside me, his presence a silent wall of legal authority. Inside the conference room, the air was cold and sterile. The long obsidian table reflected the gray Chicago sky outside. I did not sit at the head of the table. I stood looking out the window for a moment before turning to face the two women who had spent years treating me as an expendable resource. They sat huddled together at the far end of the table, looking small and fragile in the vast corporate space. I reached out my hand and Harrison placed a thick document into my palm. The paper was heavy, and the official legal seal of his firm was embossed at the top. I walked to the edge of the table and threw the document down. It slid across the polished surface and stopped directly in front of Beatrice. "This is a comprehensive post-nuptial and divorce agreement," I said, my voice echoing with a chilling clarity. "It has been drafted and reviewed by the best legal minds in the city. It is non-negotiable." Beatrice reached out with a trembling hand to touch the paper. Her eyes scanned the first page, her lips moving silently as she read the terms. Vanessa leaned in close, her face pale, as she realized the magnitude of what I was demanding. "What is this, Madeline?" Beatrice whispered, her voice shaking. "It is your son's only chance at a future," I replied, leaning forward and placing my hands flat on the table. "Right now, Caleb is facing a federal indictment for multiple counts of wire fraud and bank fraud. The Department of Justice is looking to make an example out of him. They have the forged signature. They have the audio recording of his confession. They have the Delaware Shell Company registration. He is looking at a mandatory minimum of 10 years in a federal penitentiary." Vanessa let out a small stifled sob. However, I continued, my tone dropping to a clinical whisper. "I am the primary victim of his crimes. As the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, my cooperation is essential for the prosecution. I have the power to influence the sentencing. I can speak to the federal prosecutor and suggest that this was a result of a severe personal breakdown rather than calculated criminal intent. I can provide a character statement that would allow Caleb to accept a plea deal for 5 years of probation and a suspended sentence. I can ensure he stays out of a prison cell." Beatrice looked up, hope flashing in her ruined eyes. "You would do that? You would save him?" "I would," I said. "But my mercy has a very specific price." I gestured for Harrison to explain the financial implications. He opened his portfolio and began reading from a list of stipulations. "The agreement requires Caleb to acknowledge that the $300,000 was a fraudulent withdrawal." Harrison stated, his voice dry and professional. "He will sign over 100% of his interest in the marital home in the northern suburbs. He will waive any and all claims to spousal support or alimony. Most importantly, he will execute a total and irrevocable transfer of any potential interest in the EdTech company. He will walk away from this marriage with exactly what he contributed, which is $0. Beatrice gasped. "You are asking him to sign away everything. He would be penniless. He would have nothing." "He tried to take half of a company I built with my own blood and sweat, Beatrice," I reminded her. "He tried to extort me using my own success as a weapon. He forged my name to buy his sister a mansion. He has already proven that he is a thief. I am simply reclaiming what is mine and ensuring that he can never touch another penny of my earnings." Vanessa looked at the document and then at me. "But what about the house? Where am I supposed to live?" I looked at Vanessa with absolute indifference. "That mansion is currently federal evidence, Vanessa. It is being liquidated to satisfy the bank fraud investigation. You should have thought about your housing situation before you paraded around on a live stream bragging about stolen property. You are an adult. Find a job, rent an apartment, stop living like a parasite on a host that no longer exists." I turned my focus back to Beatrice. "The clock is ticking. The federal prosecutor is expecting a call from Harrison within the hour to finalize the indictment. If Caleb signs that agreement today, I will sign the character statement. I will tell the bank it was a misunderstanding, and I will allow him to walk away without a prison record. He will be free, but he will be broke, and if he does not sign, Beatrice asked, her voice a tiny thread of desperation. Then I will provide the FBI with every additional piece of evidence Harrison and I have collected over the last 3 years, I said. I will testify at his trial. I will ensure the judge knows he planned this for months. I will watch him be sentenced to the maximum term allowed by law. He will spend the next decade of his life in an orange jumpsuit, eating cafeteria food and sleeping on a steel cot. I stood up straight, adjusting my blazer. The choice is not yours, Beatrice. It is Caleb's. But you are the only person he trusts. You are the one who encouraged his greed. You are the one who told him he was the man of the house and entitled to my salary. So now you are going to go down to that holding cell and you are going to convince him to sign every single page of that agreement. Beatrice gripped the edges of the obsidian table, her knuckles turning white. She looked like she wanted to scream, like she wanted to lung across the table and attack me. But she knew she had no power left. Her country club friends were gone. Her bank accounts were frozen. Her son was in chains. She was staring at the woman she had called a blue-collar peasant, and she realized that I was the only person on earth who could save her family from total obliteration. Go now, I commanded. Harrison will escort you to the detention center. You have 2 hours to return that document with Caleb's signature on every line. If you are 1 minute late, the deal is off, and I am calling the prosecutor to push for the maximum sentence. Vanessa began to cry again, but Beatrice silenced her with a sharp look. She reached out and grabbed the thick agreement, clutching it to her chest, as if it were a life raft. She stood up, her legs shaking, and walked toward the door without looking back. Vanessa followed her, her head bowed in total defeat. I stood in the center of the conference room watching them leave through the glass. The silence that followed was heavy and satisfying. I walked over to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. For 34 years I had sacrificed. I had worked harder than everyone around me. I had tolerated the insults and the manipulation because I believed in the sanctity of family. I had let them take pieces of me until there was almost nothing left. But that night the sacrifice was finally over. I had drawn a line in the sand, and I had used their own greed to destroy them. I was not just a successful CEO. I was a woman who had reclaimed her life. I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. The trap was closed. The terms were set. I was finally about to be free of the toxic weight I had carried for far too long. I checked my watch. 1 hour and 50 minutes remaining. I walked back to my office and ordered another espresso. I had a multi-million-dollar company to run and a future to build, and this time I would be building it entirely for myself. Exactly 1 hour and 42 minutes later, the heavy glass doors of my executive suite swung open. Harrison walked into the room holding his thick leather portfolio. He did not say a single word. He simply walked over to my pristine glass desk, placed the document down, and opened it directly to the final page. There, at the bottom of the stark white paper, was Caleb's signature. The ink was messy and frantic, bearing the distinct erratic pressure of a man who suddenly realized his entire life had collapsed inside a cold concrete holding cell. Harrison adjusted his tailored tie and delivered the final report. Caleb wept uncontrollably when he signed it. Beatrice screamed at him through the reinforced security glass, blaming him for ruining her prestigious life and destroying their family name. But he signed every single page exactly as we demanded. He relinquished every possible claim to your educational technology company, your financial assets, and your marital home. The divorce is completely undisputed and entirely on your terms. I looked down at the sloppy ink of his signature and felt an overwhelming wave of absolute finality wash over my entire body. The heavy legal chains that had bound me to a family of toxic parasites were permanently severed. I instructed Harrison to make the call to the federal prosecutor immediately. I kept my end of the bargain flawlessly. I submitted the character statement characterizing the forged wire transfer as a severe personal mental breakdown, ensuring Caleb would avoid a decade in a federal penitentiary. But avoiding a prison cell did not mean avoiding total, absolute ruin. The karmic justice that followed was swift, brutal, and entirely merciless. Beatrice learned very quickly that the Internal Revenue Service does not care about country club memberships or fake social standing. Without my stolen funds to act as a buffer, the federal auditors tore relentlessly through a decade of her fraudulent financial records. They seized her luxury townhouse, her remaining vehicles, and even her collection of designer jewelry to satisfy the massive compounding tax penalties. The arrogant woman who had proudly called me a blue-collar peasant was forcibly evicted from her elite neighborhood in broad daylight. She was forced to declare complete bankruptcy and rely on a meager government pension, living in a tiny subsidized apartment on the far outskirts of the city. Her wealthy friends did not offer a single dollar of assistance. They deleted her contact information and erased her from their elite social registry completely. Vanessa experienced a downfall that was equally spectacular and humiliating. Her digital empire of fake wealth was entirely eradicated the night of the federal raid. Stripped of her brother's stolen money and her mother's financial support, she faced the brutal reality of the actual working class. I drove past a discount supermarket on the south side of Chicago a few months later and saw her through the massive front windows. The former lifestyle influencer was wearing a cheap polyester uniform, scanning canned goods under harsh fluorescent lighting. She looked exhausted, defeated, and utterly ordinary. She had to work double shifts just to pay off the massive credit card debt she had accumulated, trying to maintain her fake online persona. There were no bright ring lights. There was no beluga caviar or imported champagne. There was only the grueling reality of minimum wage and the crushing heavy weight of her own absolute failure. Caleb received 5 years of strict federal probation. He did not go to a high-security prison, but his professional life was effectively terminated. A federal fraud conviction on his permanent record meant he would never work in corporate management ever again. The logistics company fired him immediately, clearing out his desk and blacklisting him across the entire industry. He was forced to move into a cheap, cramped rental unit, working a menial administrative job that barely covered his basic living expenses. He tried to call me once from an unknown number, leaving a pathetic whining voicemail, begging for a second chance, claiming he had finally realized my true value. I did not listen past the first 5 seconds. I deleted the message, blocked the number, and instructed building security that he was a permanent hostile trespasser. The parasitic tumor had been surgically removed from my life, and I was not going to let a single toxic cell remain. Fast forward 6 months. The bright morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my massive corner office on the 40th floor of the Chicago skyline. The city below was a bustling, chaotic grid of ambition and power, but I was standing at the absolute peak. The air in my executive suite was crisp and carried the rich, dark aroma of freshly brewed espresso. I wore a tailored crimson suit that projected total, undeniable authority. I walked over to my desk and picked up my espresso cup, taking a slow, deliberate sip. The bitter warmth grounded me in the magnificent reality I had built entirely with my own 2 hands. Sitting dead center on my pristine glass desk was a towering stack of immaculate legal documents. This was not a divorce decree or a federal subpoena. This was the finalized contract for my Series B funding round. The top venture capital firms in the nation had aggressively bid for a massive stake in my educational technology platform, and we had reached an agreement that far exceeded my wildest initial projections: $50 million. That was the official valuation they were injecting directly into my vision. I set my espresso cup down and picked up my heavy gold-plated fountain pen. I did not feel a single ounce of regret. I did not shed a single tear for the family I had completely annihilated. They were nothing but a dark, insignificant footnote in my history. I leaned over the desk and pressed the gold nib of the pen to the signature line. I signed my name with bold, sweeping strokes, securing a $50 million empire that belonged entirely and exclusively to me. I stood up straight, letting the bright sunlight warm my face. I had survived their emotional abuse. I had outsmarted their blinding greed. I had weaponized their arrogance and used it to secure my absolute liberation. I looked out over the magnificent skyline, breathing in the sweetest, cleanest air I had ever tasted. They wanted my money, but they gave me my freedom. The greatest lesson we can take away from this experience is that love and loyalty should never be used as weapons of extortion. Society often conditions us to believe that family is an absolute bond, requiring endless sacrifice and unwavering forgiveness. But when people view your success as their personal bank account and treat your hard work as an entitlement, they are not acting as family. They are acting as parasites. A marriage certificate does not grant anyone the right to cross your boundaries, steal your peace, or manipulate your reality. When faced with narcissistic abuse, our first instinct is usually to scream, to cry, or to desperately try to make them understand our pain. But narcissists feed on that emotional reaction. The true power lies in complete emotional detachment and meticulous strategy. By stepping back, drying your tears, and quietly gathering undeniable evidence, you protect yourself in ways that raw anger never could. You cannot reason with people who are committed to misunderstanding you for their own financial benefit. You can only outsmart them. Ultimately, your worth is not defined by those who constantly try to diminish you. It is defined by the empire you build with your own hands and the resilience you show when the people closest to you try to tear it down. Walking away from toxic environments is not a failure. It is the ultimate victory. It is the moment you stop setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm. You owe it to yourself to protect your energy, your assets, and your future with absolute ruthlessness, because the only person who can truly save you is you. If you have ever had to cut ties with toxic people to protect your own peace, let me know your story in the comments below and subscribe for more empowering journeys.